Chapter 9. How to break the worry habit. You do not need to be a victim of worry. Reduced to its simplest form, what is worry? It is simply an unhealthy and destructive mental habit. You were not born with the worry habit. You acquired it. And because you can change any habit and any acquired attitude, you can cast worry from your mind. Since aggressive, direct action is essential in the elimination process, there is just one proper time to begin an effective attack on worry, and that is now. So let us start breaking your worry habit at once. Why should we take the worry problem this seriously? The reason is clearly stated by Dr. Smiley Blanton, eminent psychiatrist. Anxiety is the great modern plague. A famous psychologist asserts that fear is the most disintegrating enemy of human personality, and a prominent physician declares that worry is the most subtle and destructive of all human diseases. Another physician tells us that thousands of people are ill because of dammed-up anxiety. These sufferers have been unable to expel their anxieties, which have turned inward on the personality, causing many forms of ill health. The destructive quality of worry is indicated by the fact that the word itself is derived from an old Anglo-Saxon word meaning to choke. If someone were to put his fingers around your throat and press hard, cutting off the flow of vital power, it would be a dramatic demonstration of what you do to yourself by long-held and habitual worry. We are told that worry is not infrequently a factor in arthritis. Physicians who have analyzed the causes of this prevalent disease assert that the following factors, at least some of them, are nearly always present in arthritic cases: financial disaster, frustration, tension, apprehension, loneliness, grief, long-held ill will, and habitual worry. A clinic staff is said to have made a study of 176 American executives of the average age of 44 years and discovered that one half had high blood pressure, heart disease, or ulcers. It was notable in every case of those thus afflicted that worry was a prominent factor. The worrier, so it seems, is not likely to live as long as the person who learns to overcome his worries. The Rotarian magazine carried an article entitled "How Long Can You Live?" The author says that the waistline is the measure of your lifeline. The article also declares that if you want to live long, observe the following rules: keep calm, go to church, eliminate worry. A survey shows that church members live longer than non-church members. Married people, according to the article, live longer than single people. Perhaps this is because a married couple can divide the worry. When you are single, you have to do it all alone. A scientific expert on length of life made a study of some 450 people who lived to be 100 years of age. He found that these people lived long and contented lives for the following reasons: they kept busy, they used moderation in all things, they ate lightly and simply, they got a great deal of fun out of life, they were early to bed and early up, they were free from worry and fear, especially fear of death, they had serene minds and faith in God. Haven't you often heard a person say, "I am almost sick with worry," and then add with a laugh, "But I guess worry never really makes you ill"? But that is where he is wrong. Worry can make you ill. Dr. George W. Cryle, famous American surgeon, said, "We fear not only in our minds but in our hearts, brains, and viscera, that whatever the cause of fear and worry, the effect can always be noted in the cells, tissues, and organs of the body." Dr. Stanley Cobb, neurologist, says that worry is intimately connected with the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis. A doctor recently stated that there is an epidemic of fear and worry in this country. All doctors, he declared, are having cases of illness which are brought on directly by fear and aggravated by worry and a feeling of insecurity. But do not be discouraged, for you can overcome your worries. There is a remedy that will bring you sure relief. It can help you break the worry habit. And the first step to take in breaking it is simply to believe that you can. Whatever you believe you can do with God's help. Here, then, is a practical procedure which will help to eliminate abnormal worry from your experience. Practice emptying the mind daily. This should be done preferably before retiring at night to avoid the retention by the consciousness of worries while you sleep. During sleep, thoughts tend to sink more deeply into the subconscious. The last 5 minutes before going to sleep are of extraordinary importance, for in that brief period the mind is most receptive to suggestion. It tends to absorb the last ideas that are entertained in waking consciousness. This process of mind drainage is important in overcoming worry, for fear thoughts, unless drained off, can clog the mind and impede the flow of mental and spiritual power. But such thoughts can be emptied from the mind and will not accumulate if they are eliminated daily. To drain them, utilize a process of creative imagination. Conceive of yourself as actually emptying your mind of all anxiety and fear. Picture all worry thoughts as flowing out as you would let water flow from a basin by removing the stopper. Repeat the following affirmation during this visualization. With God's help, I am now emptying my mind of all anxiety, all fear, all sense of insecurity. Repeat this slowly 5 times, then add, I believe that my mind is now emptied of all anxiety, all fear, all sense of insecurity. Repeat that statement 5 times, meanwhile holding a mental picture of your mind as being emptied of these concepts. Then thank God for thus freeing you from fear. Then go to sleep. In starting the curative process, the foregoing method should be utilized in mid-morning and mid-afternoon as well as at bedtime. Go into some quiet place for 5 minutes for this purpose. Faithfully perform this process and you will soon note beneficial results. The procedure may be further strengthened by imaginatively thinking of yourself as reaching into your mind and one by one removing your worries. A small child possesses an imaginative skill superior to that of adults. A child responds to the game of kissing away a hurt or throwing away a fear. This simple process works for the child because in his mind he believes that that is actually the end of it. The dramatic act is a fact for him and so it proves to be the end of the matter. Visualize your fears as being drained out of your mind and the visualization will in due course be actualized. Imagination is a source of fear, but imagination may also be the cure of fear. Imagineering is the use of mental images to build factual results, and it is an astonishingly effective procedure. Imagination is not simply the use of fancy. The word imagination derives from the idea of imaging. That is to say, you form an image either of fear or of release from fear. What you image may ultimately become a fact if held mentally with sufficient faith. Therefore, hold an image of yourself as delivered from worry and the drainage process will in time eliminate abnormal fear from your thoughts. However, it is not enough to empty the mind, for the mind will not long remain empty. It must be occupied by something. It cannot continue in a state of vacuum. Therefore, upon emptying the mind, practice refilling it. Fill it with thoughts of faith, hope, courage, expectancy. Say aloud such affirmations as the following: God is now filling my mind with courage, with peace, with calm assurance. God is now protecting me from all harm. God is now protecting my loved ones from all harm. God is now guiding me to right decisions. God will see me through this situation a half dozen times each day. Crowd your mind with such thoughts as these until the mind is overflowing with them. In due course, these thoughts of faith will crowd out worry. Fear is the most powerful of all thoughts with one exception, and that one exception is faith. Faith can always overcome fear. Faith is the one power against which fear cannot stand. Day by day, as you fill your mind with faith, there will ultimately be no room left for fear. This is the one great fact that no one should forget. Master faith and you will automatically master fear. So the process is empty the mind and cauterize it with God's grace, then practice filling your mind with faith and you will break the worry habit. Fill your mind with faith and in due course the accumulation of faith will crowd out fear. It will not be of much value merely to read this suggestion unless you practice it. And the time to begin practicing it is now while you think of it and while you are convinced that the number one procedure in breaking the worry habit is to drain the mind daily of fear and fill the mind daily with faith. It is just as simple as that. Learn to be a practicer of faith until you become an expert in faith. Then fear cannot live in you. The importance of freeing your mind of fear cannot be overemphasized. Fear something over a long period of time and there is a real possibility that by fearing you may actually help bring it to pass. The Bible contains a line which is one of the most terrible statements ever made, terrible in its truth, for the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me. Of course it will, for if you fear something continuously you tend to create conditions in your mind propitious to the development of that which you fear. An atmosphere is encouraged in which it can take root and grow. You tend to draw it to yourself, but do not be alarmed. The Bible also constantly reiterates another great truth, that which I have greatly believed has come upon me. It does not make that statement in so many words, and yet again and again and still again the Bible tells us that if we have faith nothing is impossible unto us, and according to your faith be it done unto you. So if you shift your mind from fear to faith you will stop creating the object of your fear and will, instead, actualize the object of your faith. Surround your mind with healthy thoughts, thoughts of faith, and not fear, and you will produce faith results instead of fear results. Strategy must be used in the campaign against the worry habit. A frontal attack on the main body of worry with the expectation of conquering it may prove difficult. Perhaps a more adroit plan is to conquer the outer fortifications one by one, gradually closing in on the main position. To change the figure, it might be well to snip off the little worries on the farthest branches of your fear. Then work back and finally destroy the main trunk of worry. At my farm it was necessary to take down a large tree, much to my regret. Cutting down a great old tree is fraught with sadness. Men came with a motor-driven saw and I expected them to start by cutting through the main trunk near the ground. Instead, they put up ladders and began snipping off the small branches, then the larger ones, and finally the top of the tree. Then all that remained was the huge central trunk, and in a few moments my tree lay neatly stacked as though it had not spent 50 years in growing. If we had cut the tree at the ground before trimming off the branches, it would have broken nearby trees in falling. It is easier to handle a tree the smaller you can make it, so explained the tree man. The vast tree of worry which over long years has grown up in your personality can best be handled by making it as small as possible. Thus it is advisable to snip off the little worries and expressions of worry. For example, reduce the number of worry words in your conversation. Words may be the result of worry, but they also create worry. When a worry thought comes to mind, immediately remove it with a faith thought and expression. For example, I'm worried that I will miss the train. Then start early enough to be sure you get there on time. The less worrying you do, the more likely you are to start promptly, for the uncluttered mind is systematic and is able to regulate time. As you snip off these small worries, you will gradually cut back to the main trunk of worry. Then with your developed greater power, you will be able to eliminate basic worry, i.e., the worry habit, from your life. My friend Dr. Daniel Apoling gives a valuable suggestion. He says that every morning before he arises, he repeats these 2 words, I believe, 3 times. Thus at the day's beginning he conditions his mind to faith, and it never leaves him. His mind accepts the conviction that by faith he is going to overcome his problems and difficulties during the day. He starts the day with creative positive thoughts in his mind. He believes, and it is very difficult to hold back the man who believes. I related Dr. Poling's I believe technique in a radio talk and had a letter from a woman who told me that she had not been very faithful to her religion, which happened to be the Jewish faith. She said their home was filled with contention, bickering, worry, and unhappiness. Her husband, she declared, drank far too much for his own good and sat around all day doing no work. He weakly complained that he couldn't find a job. This woman's mother-in-law lived with her, and the latter whined and complained of her aches and pains all the while. This woman said that Dr. Poling's method impressed her and she decided to try it herself. So the next morning upon awakening she affirmed, I believe, I believe, I believe. In her letter she excitedly reported, it has been only 10 days since I started this plan, and my husband came home last night and told me he had a job paying $80 a week. And he also says that he is going to quit drinking. I believe he means it. What is even more wonderful, my mother-in-law has practically stopped complaining of her aches and pains. It is almost as if a miracle has happened in this house. My worries seem to have just about disappeared. That does indeed seem almost magical, and yet that miracle happens every day to people who shift over from negative fear thoughts to positive faith thoughts and attitudes. My good friend, the late Howard Chandler Christie, the artist, had many a sound anti-worry technique. Scarcely ever have I known a man so filled with the joy and delight of life. He had an indomitable quality, and his happiness was infectious. My church has a policy of having the minister's portrait painted sometime during his pastorate. This portrait hangs in the minister's home until his death, when it reverts to the church and is placed in a gallery along with pictures of his predecessors. It is usually the policy of the board of elders and deacons to have a portrait painted when in their wise judgment the minister is at the height of his good looks. While sitting for Mr. Christie, I asked, Howard, don't you ever worry? He laughed. No, not on your life. I don't believe in it. Well, I commented, that is quite a simple reason for not worrying. In fact, it seems to me too simple. You just don't believe in it, therefore you don't do it. Haven't you ever worried? I asked. He replied, well, yes, I tried it once. I noticed that everybody else seemed to worry and I figured I must be missing something, so one day I made up my mind to try it. I set aside a day and said, that is to be my worry day. I decided I would investigate this worry business and do some worrying just to see what it was like. The night before the day came, I went to bed early to get a good night's sleep to be rested up to do a good job of worrying the next day. In the morning I got up, ate a good breakfast, for you can't worry successfully on an empty stomach, and then decided to get to my worrying. Well, I tried my best to worry until along about noon, but I just couldn't make heads nor tails of it. It didn't make sense to me, so I just gave it up. He laughed one of those infectious laughs of his. But, I said, you must have some other method of overcoming worry. He did indeed, and it is perhaps the best method of all. Every morning I spend 15 minutes filling my mind full of God, he said. When your mind is full of God, there is no room for worry. I fill my mind full of God every day and I have the time of my life all day long. Howard Christie was a great artist with a brush, but he was an equally great artist with life because he was able to take a great truth and simplify it down to its basic fact, namely, that only that comes out of the mind which originally you put into the mind. Fill the mind with thoughts of God rather than with thoughts of fear, and you will get back thoughts of faith and courage. Worry is a destructive process of occupying the mind with thoughts contrary to God's love and care. Basically, that is all worry is. The cure is to fill the mind with thoughts of God's power, His protection, and His goodness. So spend 15 minutes daily filling your mind full of God. Cram your mind full of the I believe philosophy, and you will have no mental room left to accommodate thoughts of worry and lack of faith. Many people fail to overcome such troubles as worry because, unlike Howard Christie, they allow the problem to seem complicated and do not attack it with some simple technique. It is surprising how our most difficult personal problems often yield to an uncomplicated methodology. This is due to the fact that it is not enough to know what to do about difficulties. We must also know how to do that which should be done. The secret is to work out a method of attack and keep working it. There is value in doing something that dramatizes to our own minds that an effective counterattack is in process. In so doing, we bring spiritual forces to bear upon the problem in a manner both understandable and usable. One of the best illustrations of this technique strategy against worry was a scheme developed by a businessman. He was a tremendous warrior. In fact, he was fast getting himself into a bad state of nerves and ill health. His particular form of worry was that he was always doubtful as to whether he had done or said the right thing. He was always rehashing his decisions and getting himself unnerved about them. He was a post-mortem expert. He is an exceptionally intelligent man, in fact a graduate of 2 universities, in both instances with honors. I suggested that he ought to work out some simple method that would help him to drop the day when it was over and go ahead into the future and forget it. I explained the gripping effectiveness of simple, dramatized spiritual truth. It is always true that the greatest minds have the best ability to be simple. That is, they have the capacity to work out some simple plans for putting profound truths into operation, and this man did that in connection with his worries. I noticed that he was improving and commented on it. "Oh, yes," he said, "I finally got the secret and it has worked amazingly well." He said that if I would drop into his office sometime toward the close of the day, he would show me how he had broken the worry habit. He telephoned me one day and asked me to have dinner that evening. I met him at his office at closing time. He explained that he had broken his worry habit by working out a little ritual that he performed every night before leaving his office, and it was very unique. It made a lasting impression upon me. We picked up our hats and coats and started toward the door. By the door of his office stood a wastebasket, and above it on the wall was a calendar. It was not one of those calendars where you see a week or a month or 3 months. It was a one-day calendar. You could see only one date at a time, and that date was in large print. He said, "Now I will perform my evening ritual, the one that has helped me break the worry habit." He reached up and tore off the calendar page for that particular day. He rolled it into a small ball, and I watched with fascination as his fingers slowly opened and he dropped that day into the wastebasket. Then he closed his eyes and his lips moved, and I knew that he was praying, so was respectfully silent. Upon finishing his prayer, he said aloud, "Amen. Okay, the day is over. Come on, let's go out and enjoy ourselves." As we walked down the street, I asked, "Would you mind telling me what you said in that prayer?" He laughed and said, "I don't think it is your kind of prayer." But I persisted, and he said, "Well, I pray something like this: Lord, you gave me this day. I didn't ask for it, but I was glad to have it. I did the best I could with it and you helped me, and I thank you. I made some mistakes. That was when I didn't follow your advice, and I am sorry about that. Forgive me. But I had some victories and some successes, too, and I am grateful for your guidance. But now, Lord, mistakes or successes, victories or defeats, the day is over and I'm through with it, so I'm giving it back to you. Amen." Perhaps that isn't an orthodox prayer, but it certainly proved to be an effective one. He dramatized the finishing of the day and he set his face to the future, expecting to do better the next day. He cooperated with God's method. When the day is over, God blacks it out by bringing down the curtain of night. By this method, this man's past mistakes and failures, his sins of omission and commission, gradually lost their hold on him. He was released from the worries that accumulated from his yesterdays. In this technique, this man was practicing one of the most effective anti-worry formulas, which is described in these words, ... but this one thing I do. Forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Other practical anti-worry techniques may suggest themselves to you, and I should like to hear of those which after careful use prove effective. I believe that all of us who are interested in self-improvement are fellow students in God's great spiritual laboratory. Together we work out practical methods of successful living. People from everywhere are kind enough to write me about their methods and the results attained. I try to be helpful in making tested methods available to others through books, sermons, newspaper columns, radio, television, and other media. In this manner, there can be developed a great many people who have the know-how for overcoming not only worry but other personal problems as well. To conclude this chapter in a manner designed to help you go to work now to break the worry habit, I list a 10-point worry-breaking formula. 1. Say to yourself, worry is just a very bad mental habit, and I can change any habit with God's help. 2. You became a warrior by practicing worry. You can become free of worry by practicing the opposite and stronger habit of faith. With all the strength and perseverance you can command, start practicing faith. 3. How do you practice faith? First thing every morning before you arise, say out loud, "I believe," 3 times. 4. Pray. Using this formula, I place this day, my life, my loved ones, my work in the Lord's hands. There is no harm in the Lord's hands, only good. Whatever happens, whatever results, if I am in the Lord's hands, it is the Lord's will and it is good. 5. Practice saying something positive concerning everything about which you have been talking negatively. Talk positively. For example, don't say, "This is going to be a terrible day." Instead, affirm, "This is going to be a glorious day." Don't say, "I'll never be able to do that." Instead, affirm, "With God's help I will do that." 6. Never participate in a worry conversation. Shoot an injection of faith into all your conversations. A group of people talking pessimistically can infect every person in the group with negativism. But by talking things up rather than down, you can drive off that depressing atmosphere and make everyone feel hopeful and happy. 7. One reason you are a worrier is that your mind is literally saturated with apprehension thoughts, defeat thoughts, gloomy thoughts. To counteract, mark every passage in the Bible that speaks of faith, hope, happiness, glory, radiance. Commit each to memory. Say them over and over again until these creative thoughts saturate your subconscious mind. Then the subconscious will return to you what you have given it, namely optimism, not worry. 8. Cultivate friendships with hopeful people. Surround yourself with friends who think positive, faith-producing thoughts and who contribute to a creative atmosphere. This will keep you re-stimulated with faith attitudes. 9. See how many people you can help to cure their own worry habit. In helping another to overcome worry, you get greater power over it within yourself. 10. Every day of your life conceive of yourself as living in partnership and companionship with Jesus Christ. If he actually walked by your side, would you be worried or afraid? Well, then, say to yourself, he is with me. Affirm aloud, I am with you always. Then change it to say, he is with me now. Repeat that affirmation 3 times every day. Chapter 10. Power to solve personal problems. I want to tell you about some fortunate people who found the right solution to their problems. They followed a simple but highly practical plan, and in each case the outcome was a happy and successful one. These people are in no sense different than you. They had the same problems and difficulties that you have, but they found a formula which helped them to get the right answers to the difficult questions facing them. This same formula applied by you can get similar results. First, let me tell you the story of a husband and wife, longtime friends of mine. For years, Bill, the husband, worked hard until he finally reached the rung next to the top of the ladder in his company. He was in line for the presidency of the firm and felt certain that upon retirement of the president he would be advanced to that position. There was no apparent reason why his ambition should not be realized, for by ability, training, and experience he was qualified. Besides, he had been led to believe he was to be chosen. However, when the appointment was made, he was bypassed. A man was brought in from the outside to fill the post. I arrived in his city just after the blow had fallen. The wife, Mary, was in an especially vindictive state of mind. At dinner she bitterly outlined all that she would like to tell them. The intense disappointment, humiliation, frustration, focused in a burning anger which she poured out to her husband and me. Bill, on the contrary, was quiet. Obviously hurt, disappointed, and bewildered, he took it courageously. Being essentially a gentle person, it was not surprising that he failed to become angry or violent in his reaction. Mary wanted him to resign immediately. She urged him to tell them off and tell them plenty, then quit. He seemed disinclined to take this action, saying perhaps it was for the best and he would go along with the new man and help him in any way that he could. That attitude admittedly might be difficult, but he had worked for the company for so long that he would not be happy elsewhere, and, besides, he felt that in the secondary position the company could continue to use him. The wife then turned to me and asked what I would do. I told her that I would, like herself, undoubtedly feel disappointed and hurt, but that I would try not to allow hate to creep in, for animosity not only corrodes the soul, but disorganizes thought processes as well. I suggested that what we needed was divine guidance, a wisdom beyond ourselves in this situation. There was such an emotional content in the problem that we might possibly be incapable of thinking the matter through objectively and rationally. I suggested, therefore, that we have a few minutes of quietness, no one saying anything, that we sit quietly in an attitude of fellowship and prayer, turning our thoughts to the one who said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." I pointed out that there were 3 of us, and if we sought to achieve the spirit of being gathered in his name, he would also be present to quiet us and show us what to do. It was not easy for the wife to accommodate herself to the mood suggested, but basically she was an intelligent, high 164 type person, and she joined in the plan. Presently, after a few quiet minutes, I suggested that we join hands, and even though we were in a public restaurant, I would quietly offer a prayer. In the prayer I asked for guidance. I requested peace of mind for Bill and Mary, and I went a step further and even asked God's blessing upon the new appointee. I also prayed that Bill would be able to fit in with the new administration and give more effective service than before. After the prayer we sat silent for a time, then with a sigh the wife said, "Yes, I guess that is the way to do it. When I knew you were coming to dinner with us, I feared that you would tell us to take a Christian position on this. Frankly, I didn't feel like doing that. I was boiling inwardly, but of course I realized that the right answer to this problem is to be found through that approach. I will try it faithfully, as difficult as it may be." She smiled wanly, but the animus was gone. From time to time I checked with my friends, and found that while everything was not entirely as they desired, they gradually became fairly contented under the new arrangement. They were able to overcome their disappointment and ill will. Bill even confided to me that he liked the new man and in a way enjoyed working with him. He told me that the new president often called him in for consultation and seemed to lean on him. Mary was nice to the president's wife, and in fact they went to the fullest extent to be cooperative. 2 years passed. One day I arrived in their city and telephoned them. "Oh, I am so excited I can hardly speak," Mary said. I commented that anything that could put her in that state must be of unusual importance. Ignoring this remark, she cried, "Oh, the most wonderful thing has happened. Mr. So-and-so, naming the president, has been selected by another company at a big promotion for a special job which will take him out of our organization into a much better position," and she posed the question, "Guess what? Bill has just been notified that he is now president of this company. Come over right away and let the three of us give thanks together." Later, as we sat together, Bill said, "Do you know, I am beginning to realize that Christianity isn't theoretical after all. We have solved a problem according to well-defined spiritually scientific principles." I shudder to think, he said, of the terrible mistake we would have made had we not gone at this problem according to the formula contained in the teachings of Jesus. "Who in the world," he asked, "is responsible for the silly idea that Christianity is impractical? Never again will I let a problem come up without attacking it in just the way the three of us solved this one." Well, several years have passed, and Mary and Bill have had other problems, and to each of them they have applied the same technique, invariably with good results. By the put it in God's hands method they have learned to solve their problems right. Another effective technique in problem solving is the simple device of conceiving of God as a partner. One of the basic truths taught by the Bible is that God is with us. In fact, Christianity begins with that concept, for when Jesus Christ was born he was called Emmanuel, meaning God with us. Christianity teaches that in all the difficulties, problems, and circumstances of this life God is close by. We can talk to him, lean upon him, get help from him, and have the inestimable benefit of his interest, support, and help. Practically everybody believes in a general way that this is true, and many have experienced the reality of this faith. In getting correct solutions to your problems, however, it is necessary to go a step further than believing this, for one must actually practice the idea of presence. Practice believing that God is as real and actual as your wife, or your business partner, or your closest friend. Practice talking matters over with him. Believe that he hears and gives thought to your problem. Assume that he impresses upon your mind through consciousness the proper ideas and insights necessary to solve your problems. Definitely believe that in these solutions there will be no error, but that you will be guided to actions according to truth which results in right outcomes. A businessman stopped me one day following a Rotary Club meeting in a western city at which I had made a speech. He told me that something he had read in one of my newspaper columns had, as he put it, completely revolutionized his attitude and saved his business. Naturally, I was interested and pleased that any little thing I had said would bring about such a splendid result. I had been having quite a difficult time in my business, he said. In fact, it was beginning to be a very serious question as to whether I could save my business. A series of unfortunate circumstances together with market conditions, regulatory procedures, and dislocations to the economy of the country generally affected my line profoundly. I read this article of yours in which you advance the idea of taking God in as a partner. I think you use the phrase, effect a merger with God. When I first read that it seemed to me a rather cracked-brain idea. How could a man on earth, a human being, take God as a partner? Besides, I had always thought of God as a vast being, so much bigger than man that I was like an insect in his sight, and yet you were saying that I should take him as a partner. The idea seemed preposterous. Then a friend gave me one of your books and I found similar ideas scattered all through it. You told actual life stories about people who followed this advice. They all seemed to be sensible people, but still I was unconvinced. I always had the idea that ministers are idealistic theorists, that they know nothing about business and practical affairs. So I sort of wrote you off, he said with a smile. However, a funny thing happened one day. I went to my office so depressed that I actually thought perhaps the best thing for me to do would be to blow my brains out and get away from all these problems which seemed completely to floor me. Then into my mind came this idea of taking God as a partner. I shut the door, sat in my chair, and put my head on my arms on the desk. I might as well confess to you that I hadn't prayed more than a dozen times in as many years. However, I certainly did pray on this occasion. I told the Lord that I had heard this idea about taking him in as a partner, that I wasn't actually sure what it meant or how one did it. I told him I was sunk, that I couldn't get any ideas except panicky ones, that I was baffled, bewildered, and very discouraged. I said, Lord, I can't offer you much in the way of a partnership, but please join with me and help me. I don't know how you can help me, but I want to be helped. So I now put my business, myself, my family, and my future in your hands. Whatever you say goes. I don't even know how you are going to tell me what to do, but I am ready to hear and will follow your advice if you will make it clear. Well, he continued, that was the prayer. After I finished praying, I sat at my desk. I guess I expected something miraculous to happen, but nothing did. However, I did suddenly feel quiet and rested. I actually had a feeling of peacefulness. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred that day nor that night. But next day when I went to my office I had a brighter and happier feeling than usual. I began to feel confident that things would turn out right. It was hard to explain why I felt that way. Nothing was any different. In fact, you might even say things were a shade worse, but I was different, at least a little different. This feeling of peacefulness stayed with me and I began to feel better. I kept praying each day and talked to God as I would to a partner. They were not church prayers, just plain man-to-man talk. Then one day in my office, all of a sudden an idea popped up in my mind. It was like toast popping up in a toaster. I said to myself, well, what do you know about that? For it was something that had never occurred to me, but I knew instantly that it was just the method to follow. Why I had never thought of it before I haven't the slightest idea. My mind was too tied up, I guess. I hadn't been functioning mentally. I immediately followed the hunch. Then he stopped. No, it was no hunch, it was my partner talking to me. I immediately put this idea into operation and things began to roll. New ideas began to flow out of my mind, and despite conditions I began to get the business back on an even keel. Now the general situation has improved considerably, and I'm out of the woods. Then he said, I don't know anything about preaching or about writing the kind of books you write, or any books for that matter. But let me tell you this, whenever you get a chance to talk to businessmen, tell them that if they will take God as a partner in their business, they will get more good ideas than they can ever use. And they can turn those ideas into assets. I don't merely mean money, he said, although a way to get a good return on your investment, I believe, is to get God-guided ideas. But tell them that the God partnership method is the way to get their problems solved right. This incident is just one of many similar demonstrations of the law of divine human relationship working itself out in practical affairs. I cannot emphasize too strongly the effectiveness of this technique of problem solving. It has produced amazing results in the many cases coming under my observation. In the very necessary business of solving personal problems, it is important, first of all, to realize that the power to solve them is inherent within you. Second, it is necessary to work out and actualize a plan. Spiritual and emotional planlessness is a definite reason for the failure of many people to meet their personal problems successfully. A business executive told me that he puts his dependence upon the emergency powers of the human brain. It is his theory, and a sound one, that a human being possesses extra powers that may be tapped and utilized under emergency situations. In the ordinary conduct of day-by-day living, these emergency powers lie dormant, but under extraordinary circumstances the personality is able, when called upon, to deliver extra power if needed. A person who develops a working faith does not allow these powers to lie dormant, but in proportion to his faith brings many of them into play in connection with normal activity. This explains why some people demonstrate greater force than others in daily requirements and in a crisis. They have made it a habit normally to draw upon powers that would otherwise be ignored except in some dramatic necessity. When a difficult situation arises, do you know how to meet it? Have you any clearly defined plan for solving unusually difficult problems as they develop? Many people proceed on a hit-or-miss method and, sadly enough, most frequently they miss. I cannot urge too strongly the importance of a planned use of your greater powers in meeting problems. In addition to the method of 2 or 3 praying together in the surrender of God technique and that of establishing a partnership with God and the importance of a plan to tap and utilize emergency inner powers, there is still another tremendous technique, that of practicing faith attitudes. I read the Bible for years before it ever dawned on me that it was trying to tell me that if I would have faith, and really have it, that I could overcome all of my difficulties, meet every situation, rise above every defeat, and solve all of the perplexing problems of my life. The day that realization dawned on me was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of my life. Undoubtedly many people will read this book who have never gotten the faith idea of living. But I hope you will get it now, for the faith technique is without question one of the most powerful truths in the world having to do with the successful conduct of human life. Throughout the Bible the truth is emphasized again and again that if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, nothing shall be impossible unto you. The Bible means this absolutely, factually, completely, and literally. It isn't an illusion, it isn't a fantasy. It is not an illustration, nor a symbol, nor a metaphor, but the absolute fact. Faith, even as a grain of mustard seed, will solve your problems, any of your problems, all of your problems, if you believe it and practice it. According to your faith, be it unto you. The requirement is faith, and directly in proportion to the faith that you have in use will you get results. Little faith gives you little results, medium faith gives you medium results, great faith gives you great results. But in the generosity of Almighty God, if you have only the faith symbolized by a grain of mustard seed, it will do amazing things in solving your problems. For example, let me tell you the thrilling story of my friends Morris and Mary Alice Flint. I became acquainted with them when a previous book of mine, A Guide to Confident Living, was condensed in Liberty magazine. Morris Flint at that time was failing, and failing badly. Not only was he failing in his job, but as a person as well. He was filled with fear and resentment and was one of the most negative persons I have ever encountered. He was endowed with a nice personality and at heart was a wonderful fellow, but he had simply messed life up, as he himself admitted. He read the condensation of the book in which is emphasized the idea of mustard seed faith. At this time he was living in Philadelphia with his family, a wife and 2 sons. He telephoned my church in New York, but for some reason did not make contact with my secretary. I mention this to show his already changing mental attitude, for normally he would never have called the second time, because it was his pathetic habit to give up everything after a feeble effort. But in this instance he persevered until he got through and secured the information relative to the time of church services. The next Sunday he drove from Philadelphia to New York with his family to attend church, which he continued to do even in the most inclement weather. In an interview later he told me his life story in full detail and asked if I thought he could ever make anything of himself. The problems of money, of situations, of debts, of the future, and primarily of himself were so complicated and he was so overwhelmed with difficulty that he regarded the situation as completely hopeless. I assured him that if he would get himself personally straightened out and get his mental attitudes attuned to God's pattern of thought, and if he would learn and utilize the technique of faith, all of his problems could be solved. One attitude that both he and his wife had to clear out of their minds was that of resentment. They were dully mad at everybody and acutely so at some. They were in their present unhappy condition, so they reasoned in their diseased thoughts, not because of any failure on their part but because of dirty deals other people had given them. They actually used to lie in bed at night telling each other what they would like to say to other people by way of insult. In this unhealthy atmosphere they tried to find sleep and rest, but with no successful result. Morris Flint really took to the faith idea. It gripped him as nothing ever had. His reactions were weak, of course, for his willpower was disorganized. At first he was unable to think with any power or force due to his long habit of negativism, but he held on tenaciously, even desperately, to the idea that if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, nothing is impossible. With what force he did have he absorbed faith. Of course, his capacity to have faith gradually increased as he practiced it. One night he went into the kitchen where his wife was washing dishes. He said, "The faith idea is comparatively easy on Sunday in church, but I can't hold it. It fades. I was thinking that if I could carry a mustard seed in my pocket, I could feel it when I began to weaken and that would help me to have faith." He then asked his wife, "Do we have any of those mustard seeds, or are they just something mentioned in the Bible? Are there mustard seeds today?" She laughed and said, "I have some right here in a pickle jar." She fished one out and gave it to him. "Don't you know, Morris," Mary Alice said, "that you don't need an actual mustard seed? That is only the symbol of an idea." "I don't know about that," he replied. "It says mustard seed in the Bible and that's what I want. Maybe I need the symbol to get faith." He looked at it in the palm of his hand and said wonderingly, "Is that all the faith I need? Just a small amount like this tiny grain of mustard seed?" He held it for a while and then put it in his pocket, saying, "If I can just get my fingers on that during the day, it will keep me working on this faith idea." But the seed was so small he lost it, and he would go back to the pickle jar for another one, only to lose it also. One day when another seed became lost in his pocket, the idea came to him, why couldn't he put the grain of mustard seed in a plastic ball? He could carry this ball in his pocket or put it on his watch chain always to remind him that if he had faith as a grain of mustard seed, nothing would be impossible unto him. He consulted a supposed expert in plastics and asked how to insert a mustard seed in a plastic ball so there would be no bubble. The expert said it could not be done for the reason that it had never been done, which of course was no reason at all. Flint had enough faith by this time to believe that if he had faith even as a grain of mustard seed he could put a mustard seed in a plastic sphere. He went to work and kept at it for weeks and finally succeeded. He made up several pieces of costume jewelry, necklace, bow pin, keychain, bracelet, and sent them to me. They were beautiful, and on each gleamed the translucent sphere with the mustard seed within. With each one was a card which bore the title, Mustard Seed Remembrancer. The card also told how this piece of jewelry could be used, how the mustard seed would remind the wearer that if he had faith, nothing was impossible. He asked me if I thought these articles could be merchandised. I was no expert in such matters, so I showed them to Grace Arsler, consulting editor of Guideposts magazine. She took the jewelry to our mutual friend, Mr. Walter Hoving, president of Bonwit Teller Department Store, one of the greatest executives in the country. He at once saw the possibilities in this project. Imagine my astonishment and delight when in the New York papers a few days later was a 2-column advertisement reading, "Symbol of faith, a genuine mustard seed enclosed in sparkling glass makes a bracelet with real meaning." And in the advertisement was the scripture passage, "If ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, nothing shall be impossible unto you." These articles sold like hot cakes. Now hundreds of great department stores and shops throughout the country find difficulty keeping them in stock. Mr. and Mrs. Flint have a factory in a Midwestern city producing mustard seed remembrancers. Curious, isn't it? A failure goes to church and hears a text out of the Bible and creates a great business. Perhaps you had better listen more intently to the reading of the Bible and the sermon the next time you go to church. Perhaps you, too, will get an idea that will rebuild not only your life but your business as well. Faith in this instance created a business for manufacturing and distributing a product that has helped and will help thousands upon thousands of people. So popular and effective is it that others have copied it, but the Flint mustard seed remembrancer is the original. The story of the lives that have been changed by this little device is one of the most romantic spiritual stories of this generation. But the effect on Morris and Mary Alice Flint, the transformation of their lives, the remaking of their characters, the releasing of their personalities, this is a thrilling demonstration of faith power. No longer are they negative, they are positive. No more are they defeated, they are victorious. They no longer hate. They have overcome resentment and their hearts are filled with love. They are new people with a new outlook and a new sense of power. They are two of the most inspiring people I ever knew. Ask Morris and Mary Alice Flint how to get a problem solved right. They will tell you, have faith, really have faith. And believe me, they know. If as you read this story you have said to yourself negatively, the Flints were never so bad off as I am, let me tell you that I have scarcely ever seen anybody as badly off as were the Flints. And let me say further that regardless of however desperate your situation may be, if you will use the 4 techniques outlined in this chapter, as did the Flints, you, too, can get your problem solved right. In this chapter I have tried to show various methods for solving a problem. Now I wish to give 10 simple suggestions as a concrete technique to use generally in solving your problems. 1. Believe that for every problem there is a solution. 2. Keep calm. Tension blocks the flow of thought power. Your brain cannot operate efficiently under stress. Go at your problem easy like. 3. Don't try to force an answer. Keep your mind relaxed so that the solution will open up and become clear. 4. Assemble all the facts impartially, impersonally, and judicially. 5. List these facts on paper. This clarifies your thinking, bringing the various elements into orderly system. You see as well as think. The problem becomes objective, not subjective. 6. Pray about your problem, affirming that God will flash illumination into your mind. 7. Believe in and seek God's guidance on the promise of the 3rd Psalm, Thou wilt guide me by thy counsel. 8. Trust in the faculty of insight and intuition. 9. Go to church and let your subconscious work on the problem as you attune to the mood of worship. Creative spiritual thinking has amazing power to give right answers. 10. If you follow these steps faithfully, then the answer that develops in your mind, or comes to pass, is the right answer to your problem. Chapter 11. How to use faith in healing. Is religious faith a factor in healing? Important evidence indicates that it is. There was a time in my own experience when I was not convinced of this, but now I am, and that very definitely. I have seen too many evidences to believe otherwise. We are learning that faith properly understood and applied is a powerful factor in overcoming disease and establishing health. My conviction regarding this important question is shared by many medical men. Newspapers carried an account of the visit to this country of the famous Viennese surgeon, Dr. Hans Finsterer. I quote the newspaper story which was headed Honor Surgeon Guided by God. A Viennese doctor, Dr. Hans Finsterer, who believes the unseen hand of God helps make an operation successful, was selected by the International College of Surgeons for its highest honor, Master of Surgery. He was cited for his work in abdominal surgery with the use of local anesthesia only. Finsterer, 72-year-old professor at the University of Vienna, has performed more than 20,000 major operations, among them 8,000 gastric resections using only local anesthesia. Finsterer said that although considerable progress has been made in medicine and surgery in the past few years, all advances are not sufficient in themselves to ensure a happy outcome in every operation. In many instances, he said, in what appeared to be simple surgical procedures the patients died, and in some cases where the surgeon despaired of a patient there was recovery. Some of our colleagues attribute these things to unpredictable chance, while others are convinced that in those difficult cases their work has been aided by the unseen hand of God. Of late years, unfortunately, many patients and doctors have lost their conviction that all things depend on the providence of God. When we are once again convinced of the importance of God's help in our activities, and especially in the treatment of our patients, then true progress will have been accomplished in restoring the sick to health. So concludes the account of a great surgeon who combines his science with faith. I spoke at the National Convention of an important industry. It was a large gathering of the leaders in an amazingly creative merchandising enterprise that has established this particular industry as a vital factor in American business life. I was somewhat surprised when one of the leaders of this organization at the convention luncheon, where the discussion centered around taxation, rising costs, and business problems, turned to me and asked, "Do you believe that faith can heal?" There are a good many well-authenticated examples on record of people who have been healed by faith, I answered. Of course, I do not think we should depend on faith alone to heal a physical ailment. I believe in the combination of God and the doctor. This viewpoint takes advantage of medical science and the science of faith, and both are elements in the healing process. Let me tell you my story, the man continued. A number of years ago I had a malady that was diagnosed as osteoma of the jaw, that is, a bone tumor on my jaw. The doctors told me it was practically incurable. You can imagine how that disturbed me. Desperately I sought for help. Although I had attended church with fair regularity, still I was not a particularly religious man. I scarcely ever read the Bible. One day, however, as I lay in my bed, it occurred to me that I would like to read the Bible, and I asked my wife to bring one to me. She was very surprised, for I have never before made such a request. I began to read, and found consolation and comfort. I also became a bit more hopeful and less discouraged. I continued to read for extended periods every day. But that wasn't the chief result. I began to notice that the condition which had troubled me was growing less noticeable. At first I thought I imagined this, then I became convinced that some change was taking place in me. One day while reading the Bible I had a curious inward feeling of warmth and great happiness. It is difficult to describe, and long ago I got over trying to explain the feeling. From that time on my improvement was more rapid. I went back to the doctors who had first diagnosed my case. They examined me carefully. They were obviously surprised and agreed that my condition had improved, but warned me that this was only a temporary respite. Later, however, upon further examination, it was determined that the symptoms of osteoma had disappeared entirely. Still, the doctors told me it would probably start all over again. This did not disturb me, for in my heart I knew that I was healed. How long has it been since your healing? I asked. 14 years, was the answer. I studied this man. Strong, sturdy, healthy, he is one of the outstanding men in his industry. The incident was told to me in the factual way that a businessman would recount it. There was not the slightest indication of doubt in this man's mind. Indeed, how could there be? For whereas he had been condemned to death, here he was alive and vigorous. What did it? The skillful work of the physician plus. And what was the plus? Obviously the faith that heals. The healing described by this gentleman is but one of many similar accounts, and so many of them are attested by competent medical evidence that it seems we must encourage people to make greater use of the amazing power of faith in healing. Sadly, the healing element in faith has suffered neglect. I am certain that faith can and does work what we call miracles, but which are, in truth, the operation of spiritually scientific laws. There is a growing emphasis in present-day religious practice which is designed to help people find healing from the sicknesses of mind, heart, soul, and body. This is a return to the original practice of Christianity. Only in recent times have we tended to overlook the fact that for centuries religion carried on healing activities. The very word pastor derives from a word meaning the cure of souls. In modern times, however, man made the false assumption that it is impossible to harmonize the teachings of the Bible with what is called science, and so the healing emphasis of religion was abandoned almost entirely to materialistic science. Today, however, the close association of religion and health is increasingly recognized. It is significant that the word holiness derives from a word meaning wholeness, and the word meditation, usually used in a religious sense, closely resembles the root meaning of the word medication. The affinity of the two words is startlingly evident when we realize that sincere and practical meditation upon God and His truth acts as a medication for the soul and body. Present-day medicine emphasizes psychosomatic factors in healing, thus recognizing the relationship of mental states to bodily health. Modern medical practice realizes and takes into consideration the close connection between how a man thinks and how he feels. Since religion deals with thought and feeling and basic attitudes, it is only natural that the science of faith should be important in the healing process. Harold Sherman, author and playwright, was asked to revise an important radio presentation with the promise that he would be contracted as the permanent writer. After some months of work, he was dismissed and his material used without credit. This resulted in financial difficulty and humiliation. The injustice rankling in his mind developed into a growing bitterness against the radio executive who had broken faith with him. Mr. Sherman declares that this is the one time in his life when he had murder in his heart. His hatred made him subject to a physical affliction in the form of a mycosis, a fungus growth which attacked the membranes of his throat. The best medical attention was secured, but something in addition was required. When he gave up his hate and developed a feeling of forgiveness and understanding, the condition gradually corrected itself. With the aid of medical science and a new mental attitude, he was healed of his affliction. A sensible and effective pattern for health and happiness is to utilize the skills and methods of medical science to the fullest possible extent and at the same time apply the wisdom, the experience, and the techniques of spiritual science. There is impressive evidence to support the belief that God works through both the practitioner of science, the doctor, and the practitioner of faith, the minister. Many physicians join in this point of view. At a Rotary Club luncheon I sat at a table with 9 other men, one of them a physician who had recently been discharged from military service and had resumed his civilian practice. He said, "Upon my return from the army, I noticed a change in my patients' troubles. I found that a high percentage do not need medicine but better thought patterns. They are not sick in their bodies so much as they are sick in their thoughts and emotions. They are all mixed up with fear thoughts, inferiority feelings, guilt, and resentment. I found that in treating them I needed to be about as much a psychiatrist as a physician, and then I discovered that not even those therapies helped me fully to do my job. I became aware that in many cases the basic trouble with people was spiritual, so I found myself frequently quoting the Bible to them. Then I fell into the habit of prescribing religious and inspirational books, especially those that give guidance in how to live." Directing his statements to me, he said, "It's about time you ministers began to realize that in the healing of many people you, too, have a function to perform. Of course, you are not going to overlap on the work of the physician any more than we shall intrude on your function, but we doctors need the cooperation of ministers in helping people find health and well-being." I received a letter from a physician in an upstate New York town who said, 60% of the people in this town are sick because they are maladjusted in their minds and in their souls. It is hard to realize that the modern soul is sick to such an extent that the physical organs pain. I suppose in time, continues the doctor, that ministers, priests, and rabbis will understand this relationship. This physician was kind enough to say that he prescribes my book, A Guide to Confident Living, and other similar books to his patients, and that noteworthy results have been achieved thereby. The manager of a Birmingham, Alabama, bookstore sent me a prescription form made out by a physician of that city to be filled not at a drugstore, but at her bookstore. He prescribed specific books for specific troubles. Dr. Carl R. Ferris, formerly president of the Jackson County Medical Society of Kansas City, Missouri, with whom I had the pleasure of appearing on a joint health and happiness radio program, declared that in treating human ills the physical and spiritual are often so deeply interrelated that there is often no clearly defined dividing line between the two. Years ago, my friend, Dr. Clarence W. Lieb, pointed out to me the effect on health of spiritual and psychiatric problems, and through his wise guidance I began to see that fear and guilt, hate and resentment, problems with which I was dealing, were often closely connected with problems of health and physical well-being. So profoundly does Dr. Lieb believe in this therapy that he with Dr. Smiley Blanton inaugurated the religio-psychiatric clinic which for years has ministered to hundreds at the Marble Collegiate Church in New York. The late Dr. William Seaman Bainbridge and I worked closely together in the relationship of religion and surgery, and we were able to bring health and new life to many. Two of my medical friends in New York, Dr. Z. Taylor Berkowitz and Dr. Howard Westcott, have been of inestimable help in my pastoral work through their wisely scientific and yet deeply spiritual understanding of the ills of the body, mind, and soul as related to faith. We have discovered the psychosomatic cause of high blood pressure as some form of subtle, repressed fear, a fear of things that might happen, not of things that are, says Dr. Rebecca Beard. They are largely fears of things in the future. In that sense, therefore, they are imaginary, for they may never happen at all. In the case of diabetes, it is grief or disappointment which we found uses up more energy than any other emotion, thereby exhausting the insulin which is manufactured by the pancreas cells until they are worn out. Here we find the emotions involved in the past, reliving the past and not being able to go forward into life. The medical world can give relief in disorders like these. They can give something that can lower the blood pressure when it is high, or raise it when it is low, but not permanently. They can give insulin which will burn up more sugar into energy and give the diabetic relief. These are definite aids, but they do not offer complete cure. No drug or vaccine has been discovered to protect us from our own emotional conflicts. A better understanding of our own emotional selves and a return to religious faith seem to form the combination that holds the greatest promise of permanent help to any of us. The answer, Dr. Beard concludes, is in the healing teachings of Jesus. Another efficient woman physician wrote me of her own development in combining the therapy of medicine and faith. I became interested in your straightforward religious philosophy. I had been working at top speed and getting tense, irritable, and at times beset with old fears and guilts, in fact in need of a release from morbid tension. At a low moment early one morning I picked up your book and began to read it. This was the prescription that I needed. Here was God, the great physician, with faith in him as an antibiotic to kill the germs of fear and render useless the virus of guilt. I began to practice the good Christian principles outlined in your book. Gradually there came a release of tension and I felt relaxed and happier and I slept well. I quit taking vitamin and pep pills. Then, she adds, and this is what I want to emphasize, I began to feel that I wanted to share this new experience with my patients, those who came to me with neuroses. I was surprised to find how many had read your book and others. The patient and I seemed to have a common ground to work on. It has been an enriching experience. To talk about a faith in God has become a natural and easy thing to do. As a doctor, she adds, I have seen a number of miraculous recoveries due to divine aid being given. In the past few weeks I have had an additional experience. My sister had to undergo a serious operation about 3 weeks ago. Following the operation she developed an intestinal obstruction. On her 5th day she was very critically ill, and as I left the hospital at noon I realized that she must take a turn for the better very soon or her hope of recovery would be slim. I was very worried, so I drove slowly around for about 20 minutes praying for a relief of this obstruction. I had not been home more than 10 minutes when the phone rang and her nurse told me that the obstruction had relieved itself and that she had taken a definite turn for the better, and since that time she has recovered completely. Could I feel otherwise than that God's intervention had saved her life? So runs the letter of a successful practicing physician. In the light of this viewpoint based on a strictly common-sense scientific attitude, we may approach the phenomenon of healing through faith with credibility. If I did not believe sincerely that the faith factor in healing is sound, I would certainly not develop the point of view contained in this chapter. Over a period of time I have received from many readers and radio listeners as well as from my own parishioners accounts of healings in which the element of faith has been present. I have meticulously investigated many of these to satisfy my own mind as to their truthfulness. Also, I wanted to be able to declare to the most cynical that here is a way of health, happiness, and successful living which is so buttressed by evidence that only the person who wants to remain ill because of some subconscious will to fail attitude will ignore his possibilities for health implied in these experiences. The formula which these many incidents together present is briefly stated: the employment of all the resources of medical and psychological science combined with the resources of spiritual science. This is a combination of therapies that can surely bring health and well-being if it is the plan of God for the patient to live. Obviously, for each of us there comes a time for this mortal life to end. We in the so-called old line churches have, in my humble judgment, missed one of our greatest possible contributions by failing to point out with positiveness that there is a sound message of health in Christianity. Failing to find this emphasis in the church, groups, organizations, and other spiritual bodies have been created to supply this deficiency in Christian teaching. But there is no longer any valid reason why all the churches should not recognize that which is authenticated, namely, that there is healing in faith and more generally offer sound healing techniques to our people. Fortunately, everywhere today throughout our religious organizations, thoughtful, scientifically minded spiritual leaders are taking that extra step of faith based on the facts and are making available to the people as never before the formulas of the marvelous healing grace of Jesus Christ. In all of the investigations I have made into successful cases of healing, there seem to be certain factors present. First, a complete willingness to surrender oneself into the hands of God. Second, a complete letting go of all errors such as sin in any form and a desire to be cleansed in the soul. Third, belief and faith in the combined therapy of medical science in harmony with the healing power of God. Fourth, a sincere willingness to accept God's answer, whatever it may be, and no irritation or bitterness against His will. Fifth, a substantial, unquestioning faith that God can heal. In all these healings there seems to be an emphasis upon warmth and light and a feeling of assurance that power has passed through. In practically every case that I have examined, in one form or another, the patient talks about a moment when there was warmth, heat, beauty, peace, joy, and a sense of release. Sometimes it has been a sudden experience, other times a more gradual unfolding of the conviction that the healing has occurred. Always in my investigation of these matters I have waited for elapsed time to prove that the healing is permanent, and those cases which I report are not based on any temporary improvement which might conceivably be the result of a momentary resurgence of strength. For example, may I relate a healing experience written for me by a woman whose reliability and judgment I profoundly respect. Documentation in this case is thoroughgoing and scientifically impressive. This woman was told that an immediate operation was necessary to remove a growth which had been diagnosed as malignant. I quote her exact words: "All precautionary treatments were taken, but the manifestations returned. As may be expected, I was terrified. I knew further hospital treatments were futile. There was no hope, so I turned to God for help. A very consecrated and spiritual child of God helped me by prayer to realize that the right knowledge of God and His healing Christ would help me too. I was most receptive to this kind of thinking and placed myself in God's hands. I had asked for this help one morning, as usual, and spent the day going about my household duties, which were many at that time. I was preparing the evening meal all alone in the kitchen. I was aware of an unusually bright light in the room and felt a pressure against my whole left side, as though a person were standing very close beside me. I had heard of healings. I knew prayers were being offered in my behalf, so I decided this must be the healing Christ who was with me. I decided to wait until morning to be sure. If the symptoms of the trouble were gone, then I would know. By morning, the improvement was so noticeable, and I was so free in my mind, that I was certain and reported to my friend that the healing had taken place. The memory of that healing and the presence of Christ are as fresh in my mind today as then. That was 15 years ago, and my health steadily improved until I am in excellent condition now. In many heart cases, the therapy of faith undoubtedly stimulates healing. People who experience a heart attack who thereupon thoroughly and completely practice faith in Christ's healing grace, observing at the same time the rules prescribed by their physicians, report remarkable recovery histories. Perhaps such a person may even gain a greater degree of health than previously, for having learned his limitations and realizing the excess strains he has been placing upon himself, now conserves his strength. But more than that, he has learned one of the greatest techniques of human well-being, that of surrendering himself to the recuperative power of God. This is done by consciously attaching himself to the creative process through mentally conceiving of recreative forces as operating within himself. The patient opens his consciousness to the tides of vitality and recreative energy inherent in the universe, which have been barred from his life through tension, high pressure, and other departures from the laws of well-being. An outstanding man suffered a heart attack about 35 years ago. He was told that he would never be able to work again. The orders were that he must spend much of his time in bed. He would likely be an invalid the remainder of his days, which days would be relatively few in number, so he was informed. It is doubtful whether such statements would be made to him in present-day medical practice. At any rate, he listened to these dire prophecies about his future and considered them carefully. One morning he awakened early and picked up his Bible and by chance opened it to the account of one of the healings of Jesus. He also read the statement, "Jesus Christ the same yesterday, and today and forever." It occurred to him that if Jesus could and did heal people long ago, and that if he is the same as he was then, why couldn't he heal today? Why cannot Jesus heal me? He asked. Then faith welled up within him. Therefore, with simple confidence, he asked the Lord to heal him. He seemed to hear Jesus say, "Believest thou that I can do this?" And his answer was, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you can." He closed his eyes and seemed to feel the touch of the healing Christ upon his heart. All that day he had a strange sense of rest. As the days passed, he became convinced that there was a rising tide of strength within him. Finally, one day he prayed, "Lord, if it is your will, tomorrow morning I am going to get dressed, go outside, and within a few days I am going back to work. I put myself completely in your care. If I should die tomorrow as a result of the increased activity, I want to thank you for all the wonderful days I have had. With you to help me, I shall start out tomorrow and you will be with me all day long. I believe I will have sufficient strength. But if I should die as a result of this effort, I will be with you in eternity, and all will be well in either case." In this calm faith, he increased his activities as the days passed. He followed this formula every day for the entire period of his active career, which numbered 30 years from the date of his heart attack. He retired at 75. Few men I have known have been more vigorous in their undertakings or have made a greater contribution to human welfare. Always, however, he conserved his physical and nervous strength. It was invariably his habit to lie down and rest after lunch, and he never allowed himself to get under stress. He was early to bed and early up, always employing rigorous and disciplinary rules of living. In all his activities there was an absence of worry, resentment, and tension. He worked hard, but easily the doctors were right. Had he continued according to the debilitating habits of his earlier life, he would probably have long since been dead or at least an invalid. The advice of the physicians brought him to the point where the healing work of Christ could be accomplished. Without the heart attack he would not have been mentally or spiritually ready for healing. Another friend of mine, a prominent businessman, suffered a heart attack. For weeks he was confined to his bed, but presently returned to his important responsibilities, where he now accomplishes all that he ever did previously, but with much less tension. He seems to possess a new power that he did not enjoy before. His recovery proceeded from a definite and scientific spiritual approach to his health problem. He had competent physicians and followed their directions explicitly, which is an important factor in such situations. In addition to the program of medication and treatment, however, he worked out a spiritual healing formula. He outlined it as follows, writing from the hospital: "An intimate friend of mine, only 25 years old, was brought into the hospital with an attack similar to mine and died within 4 hours. 2 acquaintances of mine have suffered a similar fate in rooms nearby. It must be that I have work yet to do. So I shall return and apply myself to the tasks before me with the expectation of living longer and more abundantly than I might have done without this experience. The doctors were wonderful, the nurses grand, the hospital ideal." He then proceeds to outline the technique of spiritual convalescence which he employed. The formula consists of 3 parts. During the first stages, when absolute rest was demanded, I heeded the admonition of the psalmist, "Be still and know that I am God." That is to say, he completely relaxed and rested in the hands of God. As the days grew brighter, I used the affirmation, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart." The patient put his heart under the care of God, and God placed his hand of healing upon his heart and renewed it. Finally, with the return of strength came a new assurance and confidence, to which I gave expression in the affirmation, "I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me." In this he affirmed positively that strength was being conferred upon him, and in so doing he received new power. In this 3-point formula this man found healing. The able ministrations of his physicians conserved and stimulated the healing forces of his physical being. The equally wise application of faith completed his recovery by stimulating the spiritual powers within his nature. The two therapies together draw upon the two great renewal forces within our life, one the recuperative power of the human body and the other the restorative forces resident within the mind. One responds to medical treatment, the other to faith treatment, and God presides in both areas. He made both body and mind, and He established the processes of health and well-being governing both. In Him we live and move and have our being. In the prevention of sickness and in healing mind and body, do not fail to draw upon one of the greatest resources available to you, the faith that heals. In the light of the principles outlined in this chapter, what can you do of a constructive nature when a loved one or you are ill? Following are 8 practical suggestions. 1. Follow the advice of a prominent medical school head who said, "In sickness, send for your minister even as you send for your doctor." In other words, believe that spiritual forces as well as medical technique are important in healing. 2. Pray for the doctor. Realize that God uses trained human instrumentality to aid His healing powers. As one doctor has put it, we treat the patient and God heals him. Pray, therefore, that the doctor may be an open channel of God's healing grace. 3. Whatever you do, do not become panicky or filled with fear, for if you do, you will send out negative thoughts and therefore destructive thoughts in the direction of your loved one when he requires positive and healing thoughts to assist him. 4. Remember that God does nothing except by law. Also remember that our little materialistic laws are only fragmentary revelations of the great power flowing through the universe. Spiritual law also governs illness. God has arranged 2 remedies for all illness. One is healing through natural laws applicable by science, and the other brings healing by spiritual law applicable through faith. 5. Completely surrender your loved one into the hands of God. By your faith you can place him in the flow of divine power. There is healing there, but in order for it to be effective the patient must be completely released to the operation of God's will. This is difficult to understand and equally difficult to perform, but it is a fact that if the great desire for the loved one to live is matched with an equally great willingness to relinquish him to God, healing powers are amazingly set in motion. 6. It is also important that harmony prevail in the family, that is, a spiritual harmony. Remember the emphasis in the scripture, Matthew 18:19, "If 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven." Apparently disharmony and disease are akin. 7. Form a picture in your mind of the loved one as being well. Visualize him in perfect health. Picture him as radiant with the love and goodness of God. The conscious mind may suggest sickness, even death, but 9/10 of your mind is in the subconscious. Let the picture of health sink into the subconscious, and this powerful part of your mind will send forth radiant health energy. What we believe in the subconscious we usually get. Unless your faith controls the subconscious, you will never get any good thing, for the subconscious gives back only that which your real thought is. If the real thought is negative, the results will also be negative. If the real thought is positive, you will get positive and healing results. 8. Be perfectly natural. Ask God to heal your loved one. That is what you want with all your heart, so ask Him please to do it, but we suggest that you say please just once. Thereafter in your prayer, thank Him for His goodness. This affirmative faith will help to release deep spiritual power and also joy through reassurance of God's loving care. This joy will sustain you, and remember that joy itself possesses healing power. Chapter 12. When vitality sags, try this health formula. A woman, so I have heard, went into a drugstore and asked for a bottle of psychosomatic medicine. Such medicine, of course, is not found on drugstore shelves, for it does not come in pills or bottles. But there is a psychosomatic medicine just the same, and many of us need it. It is a prescription compounded of prayer, faith, and dynamic spiritual thinking. It has been variously computed that from 50 to 75% of present-day people are ill because of the influence of improper mental states on their emotional and physical makeup. Therefore, such a medicine is of great importance. Many people who are below par will find that there is a health formula which, in addition to the services of their physicians, can be of great value to them. The manner in which spiritual and emotional treatment can restore declining vitality is illustrated by the sales manager referred to us by the head of a large company. This sales executive, formerly a man of outstanding efficiency and energetic driving power, experienced a serious decline both in ability and energy. He lost his creative skill. Previously, his sales ideas had been unique and outstanding. It soon became noticeable to his associates that this sales manager was slipping badly. He was urged to consult a doctor, and the company sent him to Atlantic City for a rest and later to Florida for a second attempt at recovery. Neither of these vacations seemed to be productive of any definite improvement. His physician, who knew about our religio-psychiatric clinic, recommended to the company president that this sales manager come to us for an interview. The president asked him to come, which he did, but he was rather indignant at being sent to a church. "This is a pretty pass," he fumed, "when they send a businessman to a preacher. I suppose you are going to pray with me and read the Bible," he said irritably. "I wouldn't be surprised," I answered, "for sometimes our trouble lies in an area where prayer and the therapy of the Bible can have an important effect." He proved most sullen and uncooperative until finally I was forced to say to him, "I want to tell you bluntly that you had better cooperate with us or you're going to be fired." "Who told you that?" he demanded. "Your boss," I replied. "In fact, he says that unless we can straighten you out, as much as he regrets it, you are going to be through." You never saw such a stunned expression on anybody's face. "What do you think I ought to do?" he stammered. "Often," I replied, "a person gets into the state in which you find yourself because the mind is filled with fear, anxiety, tension, resentment, guilt, or a combination of all of them. When these emotional impediments accumulate to a certain weight, the personality cannot support them any longer and gives way. Normal sources of emotional, spiritual, and intellectual power become clogged up. So a person becomes bogged down by resentment, by fear, or by guilt. I do not know your trouble, but I would suggest that you think of me as a sympathetic friend with whom you can be absolutely confident, and that you tell me about yourself." I emphasized that it was important he conceal nothing and that he completely empty himself of whatever fears, resentments, or guilt feelings might be in his mind. "I assure you that our interview will be held in strictest confidence. All your company wants is to have you back, the same highly efficient person you were." In due course the trouble came out. He had committed a series of sins and these had involved him in a complicated maze of lies. He was living in fear of exposure, and all in all it was a most pathetic mass of inner confusion. It came little short of mental filth. It was rather difficult to get him to talk, for he was essentially a decent person and had a strong sense of shame. I told him that I understood his reticence, but that this operation had to be performed and that it could not be accomplished without a thorough mind emptying. When it was all over, I shall never forget the manner in which he reacted. Standing on his feet, he began to stretch. He stood on tiptoes, reaching his fingers toward the ceiling, and then took a deep breath. "My," he said, "I feel good." It was a dramatic expression of release and relief. Then I suggested that he pray and ask God to forgive him and to fill him with peace and cleanness. "Do you mean for me to pray aloud?" he asked dubiously. "I never did that in my life." "Yes," I said, "it is a good practice and will strengthen you." It was a simple prayer, and as best as I can recall it, this is what he said: "Dear Lord, I have been an unclean man and I am sorry for the wrong I have done. I have poured it all out to my friend here. I now ask you to forgive me and to fill me with peace. Also make me strong so that I will never repeat these actions. Help me to be clean again and better, lots better." He went back to his office that very day. Nothing was ever said to him, and it did not need to be, for soon he got back into stride and is one of the best sales managers in his city today. Later I met his president, who said, "I don't know what you did to Bill, but he is certainly a ball of fire." "I did nothing. God did it," I replied. "Yes," he said, "I understand. Anyway, he is the old-time Bill." When this man's vitality sagged, he tried a health formula that restored him to normal efficiency. He took some psychosomatic medicine which cured him of an unhealthy spiritual and mental condition. Dr. Franklin Ebba of the University of Colorado Medical School maintains that 1/3 of all cases of illness in general hospitals are clearly organic in nature and onset. 1/3 are a combination of emotional and organic, and 1/3 are clearly emotional. Dr. Flanders Dunbar, author of Mind and Body, says, "It is not a question of whether an illness is physical or emotional, but how much of each." Every thoughtful person who has ever considered the matter realizes that the doctors are right when they tell us that resentment, hate, grudge, ill will, jealousy, vindictiveness are attitudes which produce ill health. Have a fit of anger and experience for yourself that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, that sense of stomach sickness. Chemical reactions in the body are set up by emotional outbursts that result in feelings of ill health. Should these be continued either violently or in a simmering state over a period of time, the general condition of the body will deteriorate. In speaking of a certain man whom we both knew, a physician told me that the patient died of grudgitis. The physician actually felt that the deceased passed away because of a long-held hatred. He did his body such damage that his resistance was lowered, the doctor explained, so that when a physical malady attacked him he did not possess the stamina or renewing force to overcome it. He had undermined himself physically by the malignancy of his ill will. Dr. Charles Minor Cooper, San Francisco physician, in an article entitled Heart-to-Heart Advice About Heart Trouble, says, "You must curb your emotional reactions. When I tell you that I have known a patient's blood pressure to jump 60 points almost instantaneously in response to an outburst of anger, you can understand what strain such reactions can throw upon the heart. One who is quick on the trigger, he wrote, is likely to blame someone else, impulsively, for a fault or mistake, when it would be wiser simply to avoid being so much disturbed by what is done and is therefore unavoidable. He quoted the great Scottish surgeon, John Hunter. Dr. Hunter had a heart condition himself and a thorough understanding of the effect of strong emotion on his heart. He said that his life was at the mercy of anyone who could annoy him. And, in fact, his death resulted from a heart attack caused by a fit of anger when he forgot to discipline himself. Dr. Cooper concludes, whenever a business problem starts to vex you or you begin to get angry, let yourself go limp all over. This will dissipate your mounting inner turmoil. Your heart asks that it be permanently housed in a lean, cheerful, placid man who will intelligently curb his physical, mental, and emotional activities. So if you are under par, I suggest that you do a very scrupulous job of self-analysis. Honestly ask yourself if you are harboring any ill will or resentment or grudges, and if so, cast them out. Get rid of them without delay. They do not hurt anybody else. They do no harm to the person against whom you hold these feelings, but every day and every night of your life they are eating at you. Many people suffer poor health not because of what they eat but from what is eating them. Emotional ills turn in upon yourself, sapping your energy, reducing your efficiency, causing deterioration in your health. And of course they siphon off your happiness. So we realize today the effect of thought patterns upon physical states. We realize that a person can make himself ill by resentment. We know he can develop various kinds of physiological symptoms because of a sense of guilt. Also, one may show definite physical symptoms as a result of fear and anxiety. We know that healing has been accomplished when the thoughts are changed. Recently, a diagnostician told me of a young woman who was admitted to the hospital with a temperature of 102 degrees. She had a definite case of rheumatoid arthritis. Her joints were badly swollen. In order to study the case thoroughly, the doctor gave her no medication except a slight sedative to relieve the pain. After 2 days, the young woman asked the doctor, "How long will I be in this condition, and how long must I remain in the hospital?" "I think I must tell you," replied the physician, "that you will probably be in the hospital for about 6 months. "You mean it will be 6 months before I can get married?" she demanded. "I am sorry," he said, "but I cannot promise you anything better than that." This conversation took place in the evening. The next morning the patient's temperature was normal and the swelling was gone from her joints. Unable to account for the change, the doctor observed her for a few days, then sent her home. In a month she was back in the hospital in the same condition as before, temperature 102, joints swollen. Counseling disclosed that her father insisted that she marry a certain man who would be an asset to him in his business connections. The girl loved her father, wanted to do as he wished, but did not want to marry a man whom she did not love. So her subconscious mind came to her assistance and in effect gave her rheumatoid arthritis and a temperature. The doctor explained to the father that if he forced this marriage his daughter could become an invalid. When told that she need not go through with the marriage, the girl's recovery was quick and permanent. Do not get the idea that if you have arthritis you are married to the wrong person. This incident merely illustrates the profound effect of mental pain on physical conditions. I was interested to read a statement by a psychologist that infants can catch fear and hatred from people around them more quickly than they can catch measles or other infectious diseases. The virus of fear may burrow deeply into their subconsciousness and remain there for a lifetime. But, adds the psychologist, fortunately infants can also catch love and goodness and faith and so grow up to become normal, healthy children and adults. In an article in the Ladies' Home Journal, Constance J. Foster quotes Dr. Edward Weiss of Temple University Medical School in a speech to the American College of Physicians in which Dr. Weiss stated that chronic victims of pains and aches in the muscles and joints may be suffering from nursing a smoldering grudge against someone close to them. He added that such persons usually are totally unaware that they bear a chronic resentment. To clear up any possible misunderstanding, the author continues, it is necessary to state emphatically that emotions and feelings are quite as real as germs and no less respectable. The resultant pain and suffering of diseases caused primarily by the emotions are no more imaginary than those caused by bacteria. In no case is the patient consciously to blame for developing the disease. Such persons are not suffering from any disease of the mind, but rather from a disorder of their feelings, often linked to a marital or parent-child problem. In this same magazine article, the story is told of a certain Mrs. X who came to the doctor's office complaining of a breaking out on her hands which was diagnosed as eczema. The doctor encouraged Mrs. X to talk about herself. It developed that she was a very rigid person. Her lips were thin and unyielding. She was also rheumatoid. The doctor sent Mrs. X to a psychiatrist who saw at once that there was some irritating situation in her life which she was translating outwardly in the form of a skin rash, thus taking out on her own person the urge to scratch something or person. The doctor finally put it to her bluntly. "What is eating you?" he asked. "You're peeved at something, aren't you?" She stiffened up like a ramrod and marched right out of the office, so I knew I'd hit the target too closely for comfort. A few days later she came back. Due to the agony of the eczema, she was ready to let me help her even if it meant she had to give up a hate. It turned out to be a family row over a will with Mrs. X feeling she had been treated unfairly by a younger brother. When she got rid of the hostility, she got well, and when she made up the quarrel with her brother, within 24 hours the eczema vanished. That there is even a relationship between emotional disturbance and the common cold is indicated by Dr. L.J. Saul of the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, who has made a study of this subject. Emotional disturbances are believed to affect the blood circulation in the linings of the nose and throat. They also affect glandular secretions. These factors make the mucous membranes more susceptible to attack by cold viruses or germ infection. Dr. Edmund P. Fowler, Jr., of Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons, stated, "There are colds which develop in medical students at the time of their examinations and colds which develop in many persons before or after a trip. Colds develop in housewives when they must care for a large family, and one often sees a cold develop in a patient when his mother-in-law comes to live in the house, and it often disappears when she leaves." Dr. Fowler does not specify the effects on the mother-in-law of a daughter-in-law or son-in-law. Perhaps she has a cold also. One of the cases Dr. Fowler reports concerned a 25-year-old salesgirl. When she visited his office, her nose was stuffy, the lining was red and congested, and she suffered from a headache and a mild temperature. These symptoms had persisted for nearly 2 weeks. Questioning disclosed that they had started a few hours after a violent quarrel with her fiancé. Local treatments cleared up the cold, but the young woman was back in a few weeks with another attack. This time the trouble had started after an argument with the butcher. Again, local treatments brought relief, but the girl continued to have recurring colds, and each time they were traced to a fit of anger. Finally, Dr. Fowler was able to persuade the girl that her bad temper was at the root of her chronic cold symptoms. When she learned to lead a calmer existence, her sneezes and sniffles disappeared. And yet people still think that when the Bible tells you not to hate or to get angry that it is theoretical advice. The Bible is not theoretical. It is our greatest book of wisdom. It is filled with practical advice on living and on health. Anger, resentment, and guilt make you sick, modern physicians tell us, which proves once again that the most up-to-date book on personal well-being is the Holy Bible, neglected by so many or regarded by them as purely a religious book and certainly as one that is not practical. No wonder more copies are read than all other books. That is because in this book we discover not only what is wrong with us but how to correct it as well. Dr. Fowler calls attention to the emotional cold suffered by children who feel insecure. He reports that many cases of chronic colds occur in children who come from broken homes. An older child often has recurring respiratory infection when a new baby is born because he feels neglected and jealous. A 9-year-old boy had an extremely dictatorial father and an indulgent mother. The conflict between the strictness of one parent and the lenience of the other obviously was disturbing to the child. He particularly feared punishment by his father. This boy suffered for several years from continuous coughs and sniffles. It was noted that the colds disappeared when he went to camp, away from his parents. Since irritation, anger, hate, and resentment have such a powerful effect in producing ill health, what is the antidote? Obviously, it is to fill the mind with attitudes of goodwill, forgiveness, faith, love, and the spirit of imperturbability. And how is that accomplished? Following are some practical suggestions. They have been used successfully by many in counterattacking especially the emotion of anger. A consistent application of these suggestions can produce feelings of well-being. 1. Remember that anger is an emotion, and an emotion is always warm, even hot. Therefore, to reduce an emotion, cool it. And how do you cool it? When a person gets angry, the fists tend to clench, the voice rises in stridency, muscles tense, the body becomes rigid. This is the old caveman hangover in the nervous system. So deliberately oppose the heat of this emotion with coolness, freeze it out. Deliberately, by an act of will, keep your hands from clenching. Hold your fingers out straight. Deliberately reduce your tone, bring it down to a whisper. Remember that it is difficult to argue in a whisper. Slump in a chair or even lie down if possible. It is very difficult to get mad lying down. 2. Say aloud to yourself, "Don't be a fool. This won't get me anywhere, so skip it." At that moment it may be a bit hard to pray. But try it anyway. At least conjure up a picture of Jesus Christ in your mind and try to think of him mad just as you are. You can't do it, and the effort will serve to puncture your angry emotions. 3. One of the best techniques for cooling off anger was suggested by Mrs. Grace R. Slur. She formerly employed the usual count to 10 technique but happened to notice that the first 10 words of the Lord's Prayer worked better. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. When angry, say that 10 times and your anger will lose its power over you. 4. Anger is a great term expressing the accumulated vehemence of a multitude of minor irritations. These irritations, each rather small in itself, having gathered force by reason of the one being added to the other, finally blaze forth in a fury that often leaves us abashed at ourselves. Therefore, make a list of everything that irritates you. No matter how inconsequential it may be or how silly each is, list it just the same. The purpose in doing this is to dry up the tiny rivulets that feed the great river of anger. 5. Make each separate irritation a special object of prayer. Get a victory over each, one at a time. Instead of attempting to destroy all of your anger, which as we have pointed out is a consolidated force, snip away by prayer each annoyance that feeds your anger. In this way you will weaken your anger to the point where presently you will gain control over it. 6. Train yourself so that every time you feel the surge of anger you say, "Is this really worth what it is doing to me emotionally? I will make a fool of myself. I will lose friends." In order to get the full effect of this technique, practice saying to yourself a few times every day, "It is never worth it to get worked up or mad about anything." Also affirm, "It isn't worth it to spend $1,000 worth of emotion on a 5-cent irritation." 7. When a hurt-feeling situation arises, get it straightened out as quickly as possible. Don't brood over it for a minute longer than you can help. Do something about it. Do not allow yourself to sulk or indulge in self-pity. Don't mope around with resentful thoughts. The minute your feelings are hurt, do just as when you hurt your finger. Immediately apply the cure. Unless you do so, the situation can become distorted out of all proportion. So put some spiritual iodine on the hurt at once by saying a prayer of love and forgiveness. 8. Apply grievance drainage to your mind. That is, open your mind and let the grievance flow out. Go to someone you trust and pour it out to him until not a vestige of it remains within you. Then forget it. 9. Simply start praying for the person who has hurt your feelings. Continue this until you feel the malice fading away. Sometimes you may have to pray for quite a while to get that result. A man who tried this method told me that he kept account of the number of times he needed to pray until the grievance left and peace came. It was exactly 64 times. He literally prayed it out of his system. This is positively guaranteed to work. 10. Say this little prayer, "May the love of Christ fill my heart." Then add this line, "May the love of Christ flood my soul." Pray this, mean it, and you will get relief. 11. Actually take the advice of Jesus to forgive 70 times 7. To be literal, that means 490 times. Before you have forgiven a person that many times, you will be free of resentment. 12. Finally, this wild, undisciplined, primitive urge in you which flames to the surface can be tamed only by allowing Jesus Christ to take control. Therefore, complete this lesson by saying to Jesus Christ, "Even as you can convert a person's morals, so now I ask you to convert my nerves. As you give power over the sins of the flesh, so give me power over the sins of the disposition. Bring my temper under your control. Give me thy healing peace in my nervous system as well as in my soul." If you are beset by temper, repeat the above prayer 3 times every day. It might be advisable to print it on a card and put it on your desk, or above the kitchen sink, or in your pocketbook.